Apple Pay generates a random number to send to the vendor when you buy something online, instead of your actual card number. Could you explain this process? This comment on our recent surveillance report talks about one of the most undiscussed yet wildly important things you need to understand about privacy and security, first-party versus third-party privacy, and the pros and cons of centralization. Apple sends pseudonymous information when you use Apple Pay, protecting your data from the stores you shop at. This improves your privacy against third parties, but you're now placing your data under control of a single company, Apple. Apple does an okay job of protecting its users from other companies with many of their products, but not necessarily itself. What if I told you this is actually most companies in 2021? At the Black Hat conference this year, researchers investigated whether organizations pass their users' data to third parties, something we see as an issue considering the number of spam emails and calls we receive. They created 300 fake identities with fake emails, addresses, profile photos, and phone numbers. They created user accounts, subscribed to newsletters, shopped online, and did their best to live in these identities with countless companies, including US companies like Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Netflix, and Pinterest, some political organizations like the Republican Party, and even some international companies like Alibaba and Shein. They kept these accounts open for months, and the results were kind of shocking. Of the 300, only 10 of them were affected by an unauthorized data transfer, meaning virtually all organizations played by the rules. What in the world is happening here? I have two theories. One, companies fear regulation and consequences from the government, which is laughable and highly optimistic considering big tech doesn't seem to care about a few fines. The second theory is it's more beneficial to keep data for yourself than to give it to others, reflecting a major shift in how companies operate. My best guess is the latter. I think companies are realizing data is the new oil, and it's smarter to keep that data for yourself than to give it to others. This has some pros and cons you should be considering when you're developing your privacy and security plan. The pros to centralization are convenience, and I'd say a possibility, emphasis on possibility, of an 80% kind of solution with the right services. You can put your faith in a single trusted person rather than dozens of people, and this is an easy solution that gets you 80% of the way there sometimes. An example is using something like Apple Pay. We'll limit the number of people who obtain your information at the expense of needing to trust Apple. The cons are that it's incredibly difficult to meet the requirements of a higher threat model when you're still needing to put an overwhelming amount of faith in a single company. It also means you're ultimately trusting a single provider, which is something we always have and always will discourage. It's also worth acknowledging this research doesn't cover how companies share data with governments. We know through Amazon, for example, that law enforcement can get direct access to user data, but it's not necessarily done in a way that will disrupt you or that you'll be aware of, like spam will. PRISM is still a thing. Apple and most companies have transparency reports that verify they can cooperate with governments, which is another con to centralization if avoiding government surveillance is part of your threat model. An easy way you can dramatically improve the cons of centralization is by choosing trusted and ideally open source services when you are relying on a central service. Simple Login is a perfect example. It's an email aliasing service that centralizes your emails with them in order for you to protect your emails from hundreds of companies and people. It's open source, you can self-host it, and it's something I personally feel strikes a great balance between the pros and cons of centralization for a general benefit to most threat models. Pretty much all 4 aliasing solutions on our site fit into this boat pretty much the same way, and they all have phenomenal use cases. Cool, but there's one question you might still have. Why do I get spam if companies aren't really sharing information anymore? First, spam is like a bad berry in a bunch. It starts with one person who gets your information and slowly begins to spread. It's possible your data was shared years ago, but its effects were small or simply unnoticed until enough people began to spam you. Second, even in the research, there was a small percentage of companies who did hand over user data, so there's still a chance of it happening. Third, the research did its best to offer a real-world example, and it did a good job of that, but I'd be curious to hear how more low-key niche companies hold up to something like this. If you're a runner and use Garmin, how do they fare? If you're a gamer, how will Microsoft do? In more scientific terms, the sample size was a bit small, and I'd like to see if the percentage of companies who shared user data remains constant when the sample size increases. Fourth, much of the spam you receive may come from data breaches. Each time a data breach happens, there's a perfect opportunity for attackers to target you with social engineering attacks. Very notably, Ledger, the cryptocurrency hardware wallet, suffered a data breach that exposed users' addresses, emails, and pretty much all their account information. Attackers know the people in this breach, so there are hundreds of phishing campaigns designed to target those users, many of which are claiming your ledger is compromised. Click here to regain access, where they'll then phish the information. These are also getting increasingly sophisticated as now they're physically mailing compromised wallets to people, IRL. It's wild. Data breaches are just a treasure trove of data for scammers to get and use your information, and it's very possible much of the spam you receive could have resulted from a data breach. Ultimately, this video is meant to make you think a bit, and I hope it challenges your understanding of privacy in a way that will hopefully improve your success rate. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments because it's a pretty interesting thing to think about, and I don't hear it discussed very often at all. As always, thanks for watching, and thanks to our supporters for allowing us to make this awesome content for free. See you all next time on Techlore.